Principles of Grammar, Lecture 4.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're now approaching the halfway point. As of the end of this evening, we'll have completed one half of this course on Principles of Grammar. And our subject this evening is verbs and their various intricacies and aspects. You'll notice from the syllabus that we're going into a two-unit sequence now on verbs and pronouns. If you add to that conjunctions, which we've already discussed, that gives you the three parts of speech which I think are the most complicated to use correctly. If you know the intricacies of conjunctions, which we've touched on, verbs and pronouns, which are tonight and next time, you've got the most complicated parts. Nouns, for instance, are virtually nothing to use by comparison to these, or adverbs, adjectives, and so on. This is why I'm selecting specifically now verbs and pronouns, and tonight only verbs. A verb, as you recall, is a word designating the action of some subject or its state or condition. Remember, that's for the verb to be, basically. I gave you that definition in lecture 1. This is by far, the verb is by far the most complex part of speech. There are many, many pieces of information packed into every verb. The verbs convey this information basically by two grammatical devices. One is, verbs are very inflected parts of speech. Remember, I told you that English is a distributive language and inflections are fading away. But verbs are still, relatively speaking, heavily inflected. Remember what inflection means? Small change in the form of a word to indicate a change in its meaning or role. For instance, if I say, I see, S-E-E. But he, what? Sees, S-E-E-S. That extra S there is to indicate I'm talking about a subject other than the first or second person. Therefore, it's inflected to indicate the kind of subject that goes with the verb. That's one small example. And of course, if I say I sing, I sang, the I changes to a, ing, ang, and that is an inflection indicating, in this case, the time of the action. One form, therefore, by which verbs give you information is by changing their inflections, as we'll see. Another, and typically English form, is to leave the main verb alone, but to change the meaning by doing what? Adding a little word or a whole series of little words to it, which are called helping words. And more technically, those are called auxiliaries, such as I was singing, I do sing, I had sung, I will sing. All those little words, was, had, do, will, become part of the verb. They're means in which in English we use to convey special information other than by means of inflection. Now, many languages do not have any auxiliaries. They do it all by inflection. So you take the one word, for instance, call in Latin, voco, and by simply inflecting that without adding any auxiliaries, you can get every possible thing that you can say in English with all the auxiliaries, but you have just, dozens, not to say hundreds of forms of it, and you have to memorize long, long paradigms of it. In English, you basically keep call with an occasional change to called or calls, and do everything basically by means of auxiliaries. Now, I said there's a lot of information given by these two forms. What kind of information? Essentially, 5 kinds of information are given by a verb. 5 different kinds. First, of course, the verb agrees with the subject. Some kind of subject must perform the action stated in the verb. And basically you have 3 choices here. The speaker can be referring to himself. I did. And that's called the first person. Or he can be referring to one he's addressing. You did. In which case, that is the
Second person.
second person. Or, by far the commonest, he can be referring neither to himself nor to an audience, but to some third party, which is called the third person. Right. He, she, it, the man did it, etc. That's by far the commonest. So one thing about a verb is which person? First, second, third person. That's obvious and doesn't require anything, except if you speak the language, you know that the verb has to indicate the proper person. And in certain verbs, it changes with every person. The verb to be, for instance, is I am, you are, he is. Each person gives you a different inflected form. But that's obvious and doesn't require us to make a fuss of it. So person is information number one. Second, number. How many within each person? And your choice here is singular or plural. The singular would be I. What is the second person singular in English? Well, it's actually you. There was an old form thou, which was the singular, but it's preempted by the biblical usage now. So if you're not a Quaker, it has no present second person singular usage. So we use you for singular and plural in English. You may know that in many modern languages, the second person singular has become familiar. So when you say the thou form in French, for instance, you can only do it if you would drink with that person or sleep with them, etc. If you're on a formal term, you have to use the plural. For instance, the vous, you couldn't say the tu. English doesn't have that familiarity. But we do have first and third singular, I, he, she, it, and then the plural, we, you, they. This is obvious, person and number. Next is voice. And here we have two choices. The grammatical subject of the verb can either perform the action or receive the action. It can perform the action or receive the action. It can act or be acted on. If it acts, we say that is the which voice? No, not transitive. That's entirely different distinction. The active voice. And if you say it is acted on, that is the passive voice. So for instance, I eat potatoes. I am the subject and I'm doing the action. That's act. I am eaten by cannibals. I am the subject, but I receive the action. That is passive, the passive voice. So you indicate that by am eaten instead of eat. Okay, now we get to the significant 2 points. Person, number, and voice are quite obvious. We'll have very little to say about those tonight. The 2 big guns are tense. Let's look at that first. T-E-N-S-E. When on the time continuum does the action occur? Past, present, etc. This is by far the most complex element of a verb. You can indicate a huge amount with tense, not simply past, present, future, although that's the obvious thing. And then just to finish our preliminary survey, who knows the name of the last piece of information? It's person, number, voice, tense, and mood, M-O-O-D. Now that we're going to get when we get to it, but if it helps you, take this example. Suppose we're talking about him coming, whoever he is. One way of expressing would be to say, he is coming. He comes. Another way would be to say, would that he come. Now notice one I say, simply I indicate a fact. He comes. The other is the same subject, but I'm expressing what's called a fervent wish. If only he would come. And see, I use a different form of the verb. He comes has an S. Would that he come? It's still he, but it doesn't take the S anymore. And that indicates basically what's called a difference in the speaker's attitude toward his subject matter. Is he saying this is an action that really took place, or it's some kind of special state? It's not that it's real, but he would like it to be, it's possible. It's some other status than the obvious fact. And we'll define that more exactly when we get to it. That's known as a difference in mood. And that's a completely different distinction from tense. Now we want to focus tonight on tense and then on mood for the sake of understanding what is involved, what options, distinctions, nuances exist. And in the process we'll learn certain grammatical rules for handling tense and mood. The verb is a very precise instrument. If you know what it's capable of communicating, you can communicate an enormous precision in your verb. Let's start with tense. Now, obviously and basically, this tells you the time of the action, when it took place. And if you look at the sheet that I handed out, Lecture 4, Number 1, there's a continuum there. You see a line, and under it in a capital letters, past, present, future. Those are the 3 big tenses, obviously. Now I neglected to put a little mark to indicate the moment of the present. So take a pen, and above the S in present, put a little vertical line going through that long continuum. That indicates the present moment. Everything prior to that is past. Everything subsequent to that is future. I'll come back to the top part of that diagram in a moment. Now, let's just look at these 3 basic tenses. I think the essential use of these 3 is obvious. What is the present tense used for? For instance, I take, I run, I eat, etc. Well, obviously, I don't think it's too crucial for you to list all these uses. You can if you want, but it's just common sense. Action going on now, as opposed to in the past or yet to come. And then certain other actions which are indirectly going on now in one way or another. For instance, there's what's called the timeless present, or actions which don't take place in time at all. For instance, 2 and 2 are 4. You don't say 2 and 2 used to be 4, or 2 and 2 will be 4. You say are, even though it's true at all times. That's called the timeless present. And the idea is it's true at any now, you see, so it gets the present tense. So-called habitual actions get the present. He sees me daily. Sees me. Not only now, but all the time. That gets the present. I see you taking notes on this. I do not regard this as immortal wisdom. I don't think you can do anything with this. I'm just rhapsodizing to give you some. There's more important things coming. But just to finish this, there also is what's called the vivid or historical present, where you take something in the past and you put it in the present deliberately to make it as though it's happening before your eyes. Napoleon walks into the room. He sees Josephine. My God, he says, you're beautiful. Now that is presumably all took place long ago, but you put it in the present, and as long as you don't overdo it, that's okay. That's the main uses of the present. Now let's look at the past. This is obviously any action that took place in the past. In other words, it has to be separated by a gap in time from the present, even if only for a second. I took a nap this afternoon. But by putting in the past, the idea is I'm not now. Or, I lived there for 5 years, but I don't now. Notice that the past, we communicate the simple past, what we've just done, by an inflection. Usually you just put an ED is the standard way of doing it. I worked. That's the ED is the past inflection. Now the future is, of course, action yet to come. And the typical auxiliaries For the future are what? I will, or the other word is shall. Shall or will come. Now the future, as I'll show you in a few minutes, has all kinds of auxiliaries in English. But one peculiarity of English is that you can use the present tense for the future if you use an adverb that indicates the future. So for instance, he leaves tomorrow. Now that's very rare for a language to do that, but we can use the present tense and stick a future adverb on, and it becomes a future tense, which is the thing that always baffles foreigners learning to speak English. But there are many, many forms for the future tense. That's just one. But the typical standard is with an auxiliary, shall or will. Now you might say, is this all there is to verbs? Because if so, it certainly does not warrant a discussion. It simply is too obvious. No, this is just the bare beginning. The more interesting things are still to come. Up to now, we just located an action by saying it's now, or it was, or it will be. But there is another attribute which is true of actions beside where they are on this continuum. And this is the fact that actions extend across time. When you eat your breakfast, that is not a momentary action. You don't look at the food and ingest it like that and it's over. Eating goes on and then comes to an end. Now sometimes we're simply not concerned with this fact. We just say, I ate breakfast. You don't want to say anything about for how long, when it came to an end, etc. There's no explicit reference, just it took place in the past. But sometimes you want to convey to the reader, or the listener, not only that you did it, but that it ended at a specific point. That action was definitely over. See, if I simply say, I ate yesterday, for all you know, that is compatible with, I went on eating, I ate all day and all night, I never stopped, and I'm continuously eating, and I'm still eating now. And it would also be true that I ate yesterday. Now, in many cases, the context makes that clear, so you don't feel like going into that. But sometimes it's essential, and we'll see the cases when, that you want to make a point of telling your listener, this happened yesterday. But not only it happened, it finished yesterday. It's over now. This action is completed. And in that case, you say, I ate, that's plain. But if I want to say, by 5 o'clock, the action of eating was completed, I would say not I ate, but I, what auxiliary? Had eaten. Had eaten. I had eaten. And as soon as I put the had in, that tells the listener, no matter what you think about the nature of eating, etc., I now commit myself. This action was finished at a certain point. Now that particular one was finished in the past. I had eaten by 5 o'clock. Now you can do the same difference with regard to the future. I will eat is simply a bald reference. It's going to take place sometime. I have no idea about its coming to an end. I'm not committing myself. I can also, however, say it in such a way as to commit myself to the fact that this future action will be over at a specific point in the future. So I can say, by 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will have eaten. Now when I put the will have in, that auxiliary is the signal of a completed action. An action, in this case, to be completed by a specific point in the future. So with regard to every tense, we now have two choices. The simple statement that it occurred, or the stress that it occurred and was completed by a specific point. What is the name of the completed tenses? Well, if you know that the Latin for completed is perfected, then you know that the name of these tenses are the perfect tenses. So perfect. Now this is not an evaluative term. It doesn't mean they're better than the regular tenses. It simply means they indicate the completion of the action. And obviously we have 3 perfect tenses corresponding to the 3 regular tenses. An action completed in the past. I had eaten. by 5 yesterday, is called the past perfect. And if you want to put it in one word, that is also called what? The pluperfect, P-L-U.
Past or pluperfect.
Past perfect or pluperfect. And the infallible sign of that is the auxiliary had. Then there's an action completed in the future. That's like I will have eaten. Will be completed by a specific point in the future. And guess what that's called? The future perfect. Right. And then there is an action completed as of the present moment. Not completed in the past, not completed in the future, but completed by the present moment. And how would you say that? If I had eaten is completed yesterday, what's I blank by this moment? I have eaten. I have eaten. Now you see, English takes the verb to have, which is the ownership verb. And the past tense indicates you owned it in the past and you finished it. The present tense indicates you just finished it in the present, and the future of that becomes the auxiliary for the future perfect. Now, if you look at that little chart I gave you, there's the past perfect, the present perfect, and the future perfect. Any action which completes before the little line that you wrote in for present is past perfect. Any action which completes exactly at that little line is present perfect. And any action beyond that is future perfect. Now, let's take a look briefly at the main use of these perfect tenses. And first, the use of the past perfect. The typical use, the one you have to watch out for, is when you have two past events that you're talking about at the same time. But one of them was finished before the next. They didn't go on together. They were serial actions, one and then the next. Then to keep the time sequence straight, you use the pluperfect. Let's call it that because it's easier than the past perfect. You use the pluperfect for the earlier action. When you have two consecutive events that you're referring to in one sentence, you must use the pluperfect for the earlier. Now here's an example I didn't write out, but you can just tell it. When I met Bill, I ate lunch. Now from that perspective, all I'm saying is two pasts. These two went on together. We met and ate lunch. There's no sequence. But suppose I was no longer eating. My eating was over, and then Bill walked in. I would say, when I met Bill, I had eaten lunch, and the had would tell me right away the lunch finished before Bill came into the picture. So here you have to go by the content of what you're saying. When the logic of your content requires a sequence, you must use the pluperfect to indicate. Now look at example 2. And tell me whether the had is or is not correct in that sentence. The new schedule excited me more than I anticipated. Raise your hand. How many say this had is mandatory in that sentence? And how many say it's not? Well, the first group are correct. It is mandatory what? There's two actions here, processes involved. The anticipating and the exciting, right? Which comes first, logic? By the nature of anticipation, that's something that takes place before an event. Once the event is there, there's no more anticipating. And consequently, in this case, the anticipating is over by the time the exciting begins. Yes.
Does the word anticipate imply that though?
Doesn't make any difference. You have to, in English, you don't expect the reader to start defining your terms. You still have to keep your sequences straight. And precisely because it does, the word anticipate does exactly imply that, which is why I chose it, you nevertheless have to spell it out in your tenses. The purpose of a tense is to indicate, in this case, time sequence. And you don't expect the reader to stop and say, well, gee, by the nature of this, it must have taken place earlier. You give him the explicit indication so he can sail right on through your sentence. Don't assume that if there is a way of getting a piece of information from a sentence, you should never give any other clues. And it's a flat rule in English that you must indicate sequence by the pluperfect in a case like this, whether you can infer it from the verb or not. You know, there's also a question whether you really can infer it always from the verb, because the person might conceivably want to suggest something about the anticipating went on, and he had a compulsion to anticipate even though the exciting actually took place. To make it absolutely flatly clear, you want to say this was over. I had anticipated. Now that's the typical use of the pluperfect. And it's very helpful in reading to keep one of the main reasons for vagueness with regard to verbs is the failure to use the pluperfect where necessary. Now the same type of idea is involved in the future perfect. The present perfect. And look at number 3, you will see the difference. There's the simple past. He made several visits last year. He has made several visits this year. Now you see, as long as my perspective was something in the past, I could use simply the past. Once I bring myself up to the perspective of looking at the past from the point of view of the present and saying, up to now, this is what took place. That is the essential use of the present perfect. It's to indicate an action. If you want to take this down, I think this is the best formula for the present perfect. It's to indicate an action begun in the past, but extending up to the moment of speaking. He has made several visits. Right away takes you to the time frame of the speaker. As of the moment he's saying that, up to now, this has happened. It's what's completed or over, so it's perfect at the moment of the present. And whenever you take that perspective, the sweep of the whole past up to this moment, that's the perfect, present perfect, present perfect. Got it? And that's the key use. You shook your head, no, what?
I don't understand that. Present.
Well, I want to say not only it took place, but it went on to this moment and stopped as of now.
So just by the fact of putting it in the present verb, it's not going to go on.
Well, at least the speaker is not committing himself to what's going on. Now, maybe tomorrow it will go on, and then he'll have to add a new verb. He has made several visits this year, and he will continue next year. But the point of the perfect is to say, up to this moment, this much has occurred. That's it. It's to complete it up to now. It leaves open the future. But it does complete it as opposed to simply, he visited, which doesn't tell you, it gives you just a perspective on the past. It doesn't bring you up to this moment, you see. Yes.
I think what's confusing is the difference. If you say he made several visits this year,
Yes.
that stands correct.
No, it is not.
Well, I understand the distinction you're trying to make, but I think they're both the difference.
It may sound correct to your ear, but it is technically incorrect to say that because unless you have some special context where this year is the past, you see, you could say, he made several visits last January. He made several visits last week. But as soon as you go up to now, that is where the present is required. The present perfect. That's the whole purpose of that. Now, some people don't have an ear for these tenses, And they just use the simple past for all of it, and they count on the adverb to locate it in time. But that is not the nature of English. English does not locate actions by adverbs primarily, but by tenses. Adverb then simply specifies whether you, by the present, you're talking about this year, this minute, whichever, you see. And therefore you must develop an ear for what your perspective is. But to say what you said would be the same as saying, he has made several visits. No, how do you say? He made several visits now. You see, he made several visits by now is poor English. And it's poor English because it's a past tense which contradicts your present perspective in the end. You see, you must keep in mind your perspective when you use a verb. And one crucial thing is if it comes to the present from the past, that's the requirement for the present perfect. Now just let me go on for a minute here to finish the perfect. The future perfect in English is rare. Now it's not nearly so common to use. I will go to Canada someday. That's the plain future. Will go. I will have gone to Canada before I turn 50. Now I'm specifying a point in the future and saying this action will be completed before that point. That would be the will have gone. Now that is rarely used. It's not so crucial because it's not so confusing. It's not so important to keep the time straight for that kind of future action, and therefore it's much commoner in English to say, I will go before I turn 50, just to drop the future perfect. But the past perfect and the present perfect are essential in complex presentations, and therefore by extension they're essential in all writing, speaking to give an accurate perspective on your tenses. If you use these perfects correctly, especially the past and the present, you can get your time sequence and your time perspective extremely clear, and your writing will be that much sharper and that much more focused. Ponder that for a while. We have a lot of material tonight, so think about that for a while, and let's go on to some further aspects. Because we only have 6 tenses so far, right? The regular and the perfect. But lots more is possible. So far, we've just indicated either that an action occurs or that it's completed. But of course, you know that actions go through time. They last through time. They progress across time, right? Now, sometimes you don't care to stress this fact. But other times you do. You want to say, in effect, not only this action occurred, but it went on and on, minute after minute, continuously, progressively. Now, what do you think would be the name of the tense that stresses the continuity, minute by minute, ongoing of this action? It's called the progressive tenses. And in English, what is the form of the progressive tense? It's not I eat is the straight present. But I want to say not only I eat, but now, and I'm doing it, and I'm still doing it, and I'm still doing it, I am eating. Here you use the form of the verb to be as your auxiliary, and you put an ing on the verb. I ate yesterday, just the action. But now make it progressive. I did it for hours and hours. I was eating. Verb to be. Now, I will eat versus I will be eating. And now, of course, you can have the progressive perfects. When you want to indicate both, they went on, and they came to an end. You see how precise you can make your communication. I had eaten And now what would be the pluperfect progressive? I had been eating for hours when he came. So the eating was over, but it went on until he came. And you see, you get two different stresses of information in one verb by using the pluperfect progressive. I have eaten is the present perfect. And what is the present perfect progressive? I have been eating. You just take the regular have in the past and add the eating. And now I will have eaten becomes I will have been eating. Now we put three auxiliaries in English, you see. Will have been to get that thought. And that becomes so many auxiliaries that it more or less collapses of its own weight. Now in Latin that's not true. It's the same as all the other tenses. You just play around with the ending. And consequently, the future perfect, progressive, all those can be indicated very simply. So we have how many tenses now? No. Multiply 2 by 6. 12. We have the regular and the progressive for the simple and the perfect tenses. So we have 2 times 6 is 12 tenses. Now, I could go on and on, just to give you an idea. Sometimes in English, you want to stress the action. You want to say, not only I ate, but for instance, somebody was contentious and they said, oh, I don't believe you. You want to say, not only I ate, but I did eat. And there we take the verb to do and use it as an auxiliary for emphasis, and that's called the emphatic form. I did go to the movies. As against the normal assertion, I went. And what's the present of that? You say, do you eat meat? I do eat meat. And then do again. Now you can't do this in the future. I will do eat meat doesn't work in English. You can only do it past and present, but that is for emphasis. So you have emphatic form. By the way, if you use the emphasis, you cannot get the progressive or perfect element in. There's only so much you can get into one verb. Now, with regard to, suppose you want to emphasize the future. There once was a way of being emphatic about the future, which was not by means of do. It is, however, dying, but it has the faintest echo left in people's minds. And it's the closest you can do in English to emphasizing the future, and that is the so-called, what?
I don't know what it's called, shall.
Shall and will reversal. Mm-hmm. In the normal future, it used to be I shall, first person was shall. Second and third were will. You will, he will, etc. We shall, you, they will. But then the idea was if you reverse those auxiliaries, it became not the simple future, but determination. So I shall is just I'll do it. But I will go had the idea of special determination or emphasis. And in the same way, you will was just ordinary future. But you shall go, by switching the normal auxiliary, gave it added emphasis. I think that's pretty much dead now, but there are still books that cling to it. So if your prose is not intended to be for the millennia, but only for your lifetime, you may catch a certain connotation of this distinction before it finally fades away. Now, if we went into all the subtleties of English, you would see that there are many peculiarities of English. For instance, it's the only language I know where the emphatic form, the do or did, is used for a negative and for questions. In any other language that I know, the straightforward, for instance, is you eat. And the question is, eat you? That's all they say, mangez-vous. And that's why foreigners walk around saying, eat you, when they learn English, because they can't imagine what you have to stick a do in to ask a question. Do you eat? Or they say it in French, je mange, je ne mange pas. I eat, I no eat. And that's how, of course, foreigners speak. Only in English you have to say, I do eat, the emphatic form simply to negate it and say, I do not. You see, so there's a peculiarity of English that you use the emphatic form for questions and negatives. You, of course, know that, so it doesn't tell you too much. There are further peculiarities of English which are hard for foreigners to grasp. We regularly use the progressive tense rather than the ordinary tense. For instance, a foreigner, you ask, what are you doing? He says, I eat. Now that strikes you right away as wrong. You say, not I eat, but I am eating. So you're so used to in English, if an action goes on, giving it the progressive form, that has usurped the normal, regular present tense. And so I eat is now almost reserved for special occasions, and the normal thing that you would say is I'm eating. But foreigners, again, don't know this. They don't realize that the progressive tense is swallowing the normal forms in English. Now that's just, of course, the beginning. There's all kinds of distinctions and auxiliaries. This is what's so, either, depending on your perspective, terrific or difficult about English. There are countless auxiliaries that are being manufactured all the time to communicate shadings. For instance, there is a tense for continuous actions in the past, sometimes called the imperfect tense, but you don't need to know that. I was eating is one instance of it. Something that went on hour after hour. But how about something that went on day after day? Now, almost no language that I know can make the distinction between hour by hour and day after day. But English says, I used to eat every day. And used to becomes continuous in the past when it's larger scale continuity than just moment by moment, you see. So you can indicate such precision by the correct auxiliaries in English that it's one of the things that is most staggering to foreigners to try to learn this because they think they know I will eat, and you almost never say will eat. There are so many other forms. Now, for instance, here one author tried to make a list simply of options for the future. And here are some that he came up with. He took the verb drive. I will drive. I'll drive, I apostrophe L-L. I am going to drive. I'm going to drive. I'm going to drive. And gonna, because you take the verb to go and make an auxiliary out of it. And then gonna is about to become its own type of auxiliary. And maybe 500 years from now, I won't have any idea where it came from. It's just going to be, I'm gonna, you're gonna, he's gonna. And that'll be like loss and word, you see. But it's becoming a separate auxiliary. I drive tomorrow, that's the present tense with an adverb for the future. I am just about to drive. I am just going to drive. I am off to drive. I am on the verge of driving. I am now in a position to drive. I am considering driving. I am scheduled to drive, etc. He goes on and on. And then he indicates that since future actions typically have a degree of uncertainty, there's a whole set of auxiliaries to convey different degrees of uncertainty. For instance, were I in a position to drive, I should like to drive, I should like to be able to drive, etc., etc. Now, there's absolutely no use going into all that, but it simply gives you an idea that the English verb is extremely rich in auxiliaries. You can do things, therefore, in precision with an English verb to communicate when, how long, did it stop, how long did it go on, its duration, how uncertain, etc., with a couple of auxiliaries that would take maybe a paragraph in other languages to communicate all that. So you get an enormous eloquence by the right choice of auxiliaries. You pack in all that and your listeners take it in right away. If, of course, you know what you're doing. All right, now there's one important rule of grammar that pertains to tenses over and above the proper use of your individual tense. Typically, you'll have two or more verbs in a sentence, like a main clause and a subordinate clause. And the rule is your sequence of tenses must be logical. your sequence of tenses must be logical.
That's the written sequence, you know, first in a sentence, second in a sentence.
That's correct. You'll see what I mean. I'll give you examples. Your sequence of tenses must be logical. Normally, in the absence of some special consideration, the tense of the main clause dictates the tense of the subordinate clause. Remember, the main clause is the thrust of the sentence. So the time perspective embodied in the main clause usually requires that you keep that same perspective for the subordinate clause, except in special cases that we'll see. Now you can put this same rule negatively. You cannot shift tense arbitrarily. You cannot shift tense arbitrarily within a given sentence or passage. Now later we're going to see this rule is you can't shift anything arbitrarily. Person, number, voice, mood, or tense. But let's start with tense. Now look at number 4. Now the first two sentences of number 4 are fine. She is asking us to bring as much as we can. She is asking, what is the main clause here? She is asking us, right. To bring, and then as much as we can is the subordinate. What is the tense of the main verb? Present progressive. She is asking, present tense. And what is the tense of can? Present. So those two are correct sequence of tense. Now look at the second example. She asked us to bring as much as we could. Here both the verbs are in the past. That's fine. She asked us, so we're looking at what happened yesterday, say. In which case then, it's not what we can, but what we could. Could, I hope you know, being the past of can. So these first two are fine. But now look at the next two. I deliberately corrupted the sequence. She asked us to bring as much as we can. Now that is a false shift of tense, because you're going from a past to a present, and that's completely arbitrary, and you suddenly switch your time perspective for no reason whatever. And the next is another example from present to past. She is asking us, you have your reader right now in the present, to bring as much as we could. Now there is no justification again for that sudden shift from present to past. Now if you just keep this simple example in mind, they become harder to figure out, but this is the simple idea of sequence of tenses. Typically, a present governs a present, a past governs a past, a perfect governs a perfect. Now, here are a couple more examples. Look at 5. What's wrong with 5a? What's the main clause of 5a?
First on the program was the concerto.
First on the program was the concerto. That is the past. What is the verb of the subordinate clause? Take. What tense? Present. So I switched from past to present, completely unjustified. It would have to be either. First on the program was the concerto, in which all the soloists took part. Or, if I want it all in the present, first on the program is the concerto, in which they all take part. Now look at B, which is a little more complex. The children have begun to cry because their father abandoned them. Now, the typical scenario, I say, leaving aside special considerations, would be you're looking at both events, the father abandoning and the children crying, from the perspective of actions which began in the past and go up to the present. And therefore you're using a perfect in both, a present perfect. I say the typical situation would be you're looking at both these actions as actions which began in the past and go up to the present. In which case, the perfect in the main clause has to govern a perfect in the subordinate. So it would have to be the children have begun to cry because their father has abandoned them. But you could imagine a situation in which that has is unnecessary. And here the rule is, you don't make the two tenses the same just because that's an absolute. It's only when there are no overriding considerations. But suppose the situation was like this. A year ago, say, the father abandoned them. And a year passed and nothing much happened to the kids, and then they began to cry. So you want to make the point in your sentence. One event happened long ago, and the other has just now begun as looked at from the point of view of the present. Then I could say, the children have begun to cry because their father abandoned them. And by doing it that way, by deliberately leaving the perfect out the second time, I'm saying these events are significantly separated in time. One is purely past, and the other is just now coming into being looked at from the perspective of the present. Now, if you have a content which warrants that, that's fine. I put that in simply to tell you that it's not an absolute that you must use the same tense. But if you deviate from the tense of the main clause, you must be prepared to show that your content logically requires. In the absence of that, it's an unwarranted shift of tense. David, you had a question?
No,
oh,
sorry.
Yes, Jim.
It would seem to me that because these events are sequential in the same sense as in example 2, that it would be appropriate if it was close in time to say abandon them. If you're trying to make the point that you were just making, that you would then say because their father had abandoned them.
Well, but it's when you say their father had abandoned them, you're going to have two perfects. It's going to be very tricky. You're ending two actions at two different perspectives. Typically, that would be too hard for a person to take in. You can't get that much subtlety. The question, their father had abandoned them by when? Now, if you're having it ending before what? An action which is ending in the present. But it's obvious from the past then. You don't need the extra pluperfect. The pluperfect is to end it before an action in the past.
Well, let's bring it then, for forgetting that second part of my example then, but because, that they began to cry, in effect, after their father abandoned them, just taking this particular sentence.
You could say that. They began to cry after their father abandoned them.
Within the form that you have it there, though, my point would be that the action of their father took place prior in time, so therefore it should have an earlier tense than the main clause.
If you want to indicate that. But in this particular conjunction, the normal context would be, it is not essential for you to say one took place before the other. You're looking at both as a fait accompli. You're saying, as of this moment, this is my perspective. These kids are crying because this guy isn't here, you see?
Okay.
And the as of this moment gives you two perfects, you see?
I see, yes, thank you.
All right, now the only thing you need to know to be able to apply this rule is you have to know the difference between a present and a past tense. And some people are shocked to know what the past tense of certain verbs is. Past tense is, correct. Let me give you 5 biggies that you must know. The past of can is could. The past of will is would. That's with an L. Or ULD. The past of have is had. The past of may is might. And the past of shall is should. Now, if you keep that in mind, you will not have a lot of trouble with tenses. All right, mood. Now, we have a rather long class tonight, so I'm just going to go on, and each time you will think, well, he's finally finished, and we're going to start something new, but it will come to an end. And there's no other way to do it. Mood, M-O-O-D. Mood is the changes in a verb to indicate the attitude of a speaker. The attitude of the speaker. This has nothing to do with time. The manner in which the person conceives the action of the verb. The mood he's in, if you want to look at it that way. Now, there are many moods in some languages, but basically in English there's only two. You can think of them as the straightforward and the peculiar. That's not what they're called, but that's what it amounts to. The straightforward is merely to state facts or ask questions. Merely to indicate facts. And this is by far the most common. What would be a good name for the mood that is used to indicate facts? That's all. Just to indicate. This is, this was, this will be, this has been. All the verbs we used up to now simply say, in one time or another, perfect or progressive or whichever, this is.
Objective.
No. Indicative, right. Objective would have been a good word, but that's not the word.
Been taken.
Now, the opposite, the contrast to that, is any action which brings in some part of the speaker's own psyche. Where he says, this is doubtful. I really want this. I pretend this. This isn't real, but it might be real. I demand this. I insist on this, etc. And here we're bringing in the subjective element of the speaker. So you could call it the subjective mood, but actually it's a word related to that. It's called the subjunctive mood. This is the mood where the speaker views the action as other than simply factual. Could be doubtful, desired, sought after, hated, whatever. Now look at number 6 for the typical use, or one typical use. The prisoner sees his lawyer. That's indicative. I recommend that the prisoner see his lawyer. Now here, see is the verb and prisoner is the subject. So the subordinate clause is the prisoner see his lawyer, which of course you can't say by itself, because it can't stand by itself. It's not a factual statement we're making. We switch from sees to see, and that's English's way of reminding you. This is merely a recommendation. This is not a fact. If it was a fact, it would have to be he sees his lawyer. And this is a very valuable distinction then, because what it does, by switching the form of the verb, it tells you this is simply a subjective state of the speaker so far. It's not yet a fact. What the subjunctive does is to preserve the distinction between fact and fancy, between fact and desire. Or if you know the objective is metaphysics, the best way to put this would be the subjunctive preserve the distinction between, well, I was thinking of
the it is versus the I wish? Or?
All right, all of that's okay. I was thinking of existence and consciousness, but whatever you say, that's okay. When it's out there, it's indicative. When it's out there as viewed by the in here, it's subjunctive. Now, the main form of the inflection of the subjunctive takes the verb to be. In the normal, it's I am, you are, he is. We are, you are, they are. In the subjunctive, it's one word all the way through. I recommend that I be, that you be, that he be, that we be. So the be is, in that usage, is the infallible sign of the subjunctive. Also, another typical use of the subjunctive is in the third person singular, where we would normally add an S, as in sees here in number 6, you drop the S for the subjunctive. So the subjunctive is actually a very valuable mood, because it helps to hammer home the difference between reality desire. Basically speaking, there are two sub-uses of the subjunctive. Sub-uses of the subjunctive. Two divisions within the subjunctive. One is the emotional. And that's any expression of wish, regret, command, desire, sometimes called fervent desire. Such as I recommend, the example given. I demand that the singer perform. That's the subjunctive. Because the indicative would be the singer performs. But here we make it the subjunctive because you want to indicate it's your demand. Or, I move that the report be accepted. That be is the parliamentary subjunctive. You say, I move, I want, I desire, so you use the subjunctive. What about somebody sneezes? You don't say, God blesses you. You say, God bless you. And that bless is subjunctive. It's short for, would that God bless you. Or what about suffice it to say? Now it should be, it suffices to say. But here it's short for, let it suffice. I want it to be enough. Therefore, use the subjunctive. Now, the subjunctive in this use, unfortunately, is dying in English. All inflections are disappearing in English. And although I think this is a useful one, you can't escape the fact that it is going. Therefore, although in some uses you must follow it, take a sentence like, I wish she were a soprano. Now, I wish would normally take the subjunctive, but an awful lot of people think, I wish she was a soprano, sounds perfectly fine. And even a lot of skilled writers are using it. And therefore, most usage words now say, unless you're being very formal and precise, if you want any sort of colloquial overtone, in many of these cases you can drop the subjunctive and go to the indicative. I don't do that, but there is a gray area. In the second use of the subjunctive, however, you do not have as much latitude. And that is what's called the conditional use. The conditional use. To designate a condition contrary to fact. Something that's either improbable or impossible. A condition contrary to fact. Something that's either improbable or outrightly impossible. And this is a very valuable use. Look at number 7. If I were you, I would find out the truth. Now the were there, of course, is subjunctive, because the normal would be I was. But this is I were. And that's the subjunctive in a condition of what am I saying by putting it in the word? I'm not you. This is out. This is contrary to fact. And I'm reminding you, and in fact, I know that this is not the way things are. By putting it in the subjunctive and saying, this is not the factual indicative tense, this is deliberately a pretend tense. You see? So you're keeping your knowledge of facts straight. Next, even if he were here, still number 7, it would make no difference. He's not here, I'm stressing. But even if he were, but I know he's not, contrary to fact. He acts as if he were an athlete. He's not an athlete. That's contrary to fact. And now look at what you can do given the subjunctive with the 4th item. He acts as if he were sick. He acts as if he is sick. Now one is the subjunctive and one is the indicative. What is the difference that you can communicate? By simply whether you use the subjunctive or the indicative. Nor.
If you use the subjunctive, it indicates he's pretending or faking or
That's
something.
right. If you use the subjunctive, you're saying this is very doubtful to me. He acts as if he were sick, but I suspect he really is okay. On the other hand, simply he acts as if he is sick, straight indicative, much more the suggestion, this guy is sick. I believe him. This is what his actions indicate. Therefore, the subjunctive is a very helpful tense for importing your doubt briefly into a sentence without making a big fuss. There are many cases, where you want to write and you want to indicate, I think this is very unlikely, but you don't want to interrupt the flow of a complex thought and say, by the way, this is not really true, I have grave doubts, etc. And you simply switch to the subjunctive at the appropriate point, and it conveys the aura of doubt without you having to do anything about it, if you know when to do it.
Dr. Peikoff?
Yes.
In the first one, if I were you, I would find out the truth. I would find out. What?
Would find is still subjunctive. That is conditional. Conditional. It's the conditional consequence, and it is considered a form of the subjunctive tense.
Is there any problem with sequence of tense when you use two like that?
Yes, it certainly is a problem of sequence. If you give me a minute, I'll get right to that. I just want to indicate that there are other moods beside indicative and subjunctive. As I say, some languages have a whole list of moods. But English is really only one other mood that counts, and that is directly ordering somebody to do something, like get up and leave the room. Now, I'm not indicating a fact. I'm not per se expressing a wish. I'm just telling you what to do, and that's called the imperative mood. Now, the same principle of consistency applies to moods as applied to tenses. You must not improperly shift moods. You must be consistent in your mood from one clause to the next within a given passage. Just as you must be consistent in tense, you must be consistent in mood. Now, the number 8, you understand, of course, that tense also applies to the subjunctive. Can I say that again? Does that baffle you? There's present subjunctive, past subjunctive. So you can have tense within a mood, obviously. Present indicative, past indicative. Now, if you look at number 8, the first sentence is what mood? If he is a painter, he will not ignore. This is a factual statement. It's a condition, but it's a factual. You're simply saying, if this is so, this will be so. Cause and effect. Nothing about your attitude. Nothing contrary to fact. So what mood is that? Is and will ignore. Both indicative. And what tense? If he is, present, basically. Now look at the next one. If he were a painter, he would not ignore. Now by putting the were, I'm switching to the subjunctive, right? And therefore, I have to go to he would not ignore, which is the subjunctive version. Still in the present tense, if he were now a painter, he would not ignore. So both of these are present subjunctive. Now the next two are the same distinction, but in past tense. If he was a painter, he didn't ignore. It's the same thought, only it's indicative, but past. And then, if he had been a painter, he would not have ignored. And this is the past subjunctive. This is apropos of what we call sequence of moods. Other things being equal, the indicative in the main clause must take an indicative. The subjunctive must take the subjunctive. So you have to be consistent not only in tense, but in mood. And if you are not consistent, you commit the crime, or the, what would you call it, the error of shifting moods arbitrarily, which is just as bad as shifting tenses arbitrarily. Examples are given in number 9. Arbitrary shift of mood. A judge ought to punish the guilty man, and above all, don't let anybody try to bribe him. What is the mood of the first? Now think, he ought to punish. That verb per se is a simple statement of what his obligation is, and that is indicative. What is, don't anybody try. Don't you do it. Imperative. So this is a shift of mood from indicative to imperative. What's the next one? Laces effeminate and frills be hanged. Now this is a stupid example. No one will do that, but I just made it up to show you. Because if they get too tricky, they don't work as exercise. As examples. What is the mood of the first? Lace is effeminate. Indicative. What is frills be hanged?
Subjunctive.
That's subjunctive of fervent wish, right. So this is a switch from indicative to subjunctive. And now I took the example of 8 and deliberately shifted mood. And you would get, if he is a painter, he would not ignore, right? And that is from, again, indicative to the subjunctive of condition, the conditional subjunctive. And that is, again, unjustified shifted mood. So basically, the grammatical principle here for tense and mood is use the one that precisely expresses the conditions of your utterance, and then be consistent from within the passage. Keep your tense and your mood consistent unless there is some overriding consideration in the content. Now, the same thing would apply to voice. Now, voice is much easier, and we can zip through voice. Voice simply indicates whether the subject acts or is acted on. Notice it is possible in any tense and any mood to have an active or a passive. Thus, past, I hated the boy. That's active. I hated. Passive is I was hated by the boy. Say the pluperfect, active. I, indicative now. I had hated. What is the pluperfect passive? No. Indicative, no words. I had been hated. The present perfect, active. I have hated. The present perfect passive. I have been hated. And of course you can do all this with the progressive tenses. I was hitting, and now you want to indicate you were on the receiving end across time in the past. I was being hit. I was being hit. Being is the progressive passive auxiliary. I had been hitting. I had
been being hit.
You got it back. I had been being hit. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Right. I wouldn't even try to give you the future perfect progressive passive. When it comes to I will have been being hit. Now the same is true in the subjunctive mood. You can have I urge that he take. That's active. I urge that he be taken. Imperative. Take. Now what would be the passive imperative?
Be taken.
Be taken. Be guided by me. See, that's passive imperative. So you can have passive all the way through. And in Latin, of course, therefore, every one of those verbs in every mood and tense has to have another form to indicate the passive. So you can just imagine how many forms you end up with. And in English, you do it all with these auxiliaries. You see, just to being or whichever. With the other auxiliaries, throw in one more, and that makes it passive. A word now about the use of the passive. The passive is not a good voice, generally. It's weak, unemphatic, dull. The essence of a good sentence is the subject and the object. Birds fly. I eat cake. Now what the passive voice does is put the real subject into the background. It focuses on the action apart from the real subject. Instead of I eat cake, it becomes cake is eaten by me. So it puts all the focus on the object, and the real doer of the action gets left off with a by prepositional phrase. Therefore, generally speaking, the passive is poor. And look at number 10. The difference. With a smile, Bill hit the final run of the game. That's straightforward. Bill hit as against. The final run of the game was hit by Bill with a smile. Now, of course, this is also ambiguous. I know it sounds like the smile was the agent, but that's often true with a passive. But even apart from that problem, this passive voice is not obviously very strong. When is the proper use of the passive voice? When the doer of the action is either unknown or really unimportant. In other words, when the receiver is truly the focus of your thought. Now, the run was hit by Bill is bad, because it's very hard to think of a case where the run is what you're focusing on. But suppose a sentence like this. My brother was promoted to the rank of captain. Now there, I don't care who promoted him, which lackey did it. What's important is, in this case, the recipient, that he was promoted, that he received the action. So that's a fine. That's passive is okay, because there, the focus of the thought is on the recipient. But unless it's a situation like that, it is not desirable to use the passive voice. The grammatical subject, you see, is in a much more powerful position. And there, look at the difference between he overwhelmed me, I was overwhelmed by him. It's the same thought, but the first focuses on he and the second on I. And therefore, give your subject usually to the actor. Now, the same rule of sequence applies to voice, and we may as well throw in person as well, as it does to and number, as it does to tense and mood. No arbitrary shifts. Your sequence must be consistent. Look at 11 and you'll see some violations here. Number 11. Mary studied art and her free time was spent playing cards. Mary studied art. This is a compound sentence. Two main clauses. The verb is what voice? Study. Act. Her free time was spent. What voice? Passive. Active to passive. Arbitrary shift. No reason. What should you say? Mary studied art and spent her free time. No reason for this shift. So that's an arbitrary shift of voice. And the next two will give you shifts of person and number. Workers will like the new cafe because you need not leave work to eat. Workers is what voice? And what person? Third person. You need not is second person. Shift from third to second person. So you'd either have to say, you will like the new cafe because you need not leave, or workers will like the new cafe because they. And the third will give you both a shift of person and number. We have reached a stage where one ought to be ready for war. We is first plural, one is third singular. All right, I'll give you a couple minutes to digest and master that, and then we're going to do some more theoretical work after a break. I want to go on now to a new aspect of our theory tonight. Verbals. Not verbs, but verbals. V-E-R-B-A-L-S. We've already mentioned these. These are words that are derived from verbs but are not themselves verbs. And we mentioned that there are three verbals, which we called participle, gerund, and infinitive. And now I want to look at these more systematically. Even though they are not verbs, they are derived from verbs and they have many of the attributes of verbs. And therefore this is a good time to get them out of the way. And tonight we'll do at least two, participle and gerund. That will leave us with the infinitive for next week. Let's look at first a participle. Now, I've already briefly indicated this a few lectures ago, but let's start from scratch. A participle is a verbal adjective. It's an adjective derived from a verb. Therefore, it has some features of an adjective and some of a verb. Running water, for instance. Running is a participle. And as an adjective, it tells you something about, in this case, water. It characterizes, modifies, etc. It does what an adjective is supposed to do. On the other hand, like a verb, a participle has many other features. For instance, it can take an object. A participle can have an object, which an ordinary adjective can't. Hitting the boy, she did so-and-so. Hitting modifies she, and itself takes an object, the boy. So it's a cross between a verb and an adjective. It's called a verbal adjective. Now you know, of course, that although a participle is not a verb, when you combine it with the proper auxiliary, the combination makes a verb. I am walking. The verb is am walking. And if you break up that am walking, it's two elements. The root of the verb is the walking, and that's the participle form. And combine it with the am, and the am walking gives you your present progressive verb. But by itself, without an auxiliary, simply walking down the street, she said such and such. That is a participle and is functioned as an adjective. Now all of this applies equally to the past. In other words, participles have tenses. That's a feature they share thanks to their origins in verbs. So if you take the verb form I have walked, that's made up of have is the auxiliary, and what is the participle there? Walked. And the ed indicate that it's not the present participle, but the past participle. As a general rule in English, the present participle ends in ing, and the past usually ends in ed, except if it's a rare verb like sing, sang, sung. I had eaten instead of eaten. And the typical one ends in ed, the past participle. Now if you want examples of a past participle as an adjective, look at number 12. Participle is always an adjective. Who can see a past participle functioning as an adjective in number 12? Raise your hand if you see one. There's two of them in there. Yes?
Lighted?
Lighted is the past participle of the verb light, right? And what does it modify here? Streets. Tells you what kind of streets. Who sees another participle? A past participle, again, functioning as an adjective. Yes?
Dismissed. Dismayed.
Dismayed. Right. And what does it modify? Who was dismayed? They. Right. So we have two adjectives here, dismayed and lightened, both of which happen to be participles in the past tense. Now, there is a third possible tense of a participle in English, so you can have three tenses. We've so far looked at the simple present and past. But what about if you want to use a participle in the perfect form to indicate an adjectival use that's over, right? So instead of saying eating or eaten, you would use a perfect participle, and what would that be? No, ate is just he ate. Participle is the thing that can't by itself be combined with the subject.
Having eaten.
Having eaten, he lay down. That tells you the action was completed. It's still in the form of an adjective, a modifier. He, the type of person who has just completed eating, lay down. So it's also a participle, but it's a participle in its perfect form. And that's the only perfect tense possible for the English participle. Now, at the risk of overtaxing you, you should simply know that there's also passive voices for participles. So for instance, eating, being eaten, having eaten. What would the passive voice of the perfect participle be? Having eaten, having been eaten. Right. Having been eaten by cannibals, he no longer discussed medicine. That is a perfect participle in the past. You see why we cover participles under verbs even though they're not verbs, because they have so many of the attributes in verbs. Now the main thing you have to know in using participles correctly is the sequence of tenses. When do you use the present and when do you use the perfect? That's the big question. Because the past per se is never a problem. It's always used as an adjective in the simple way like number 12. The big thing that you'll hesitate over is when to use the present, when to use the perfect. When to say running, when to say having run. And there, the answer is very simple. What's the answer? If it takes place the same time as the main verb, you use present participle.
Could you repeat that first?
If the participle designates action at the same time as the main verb, use the present participle. If it designates action prior to the main verb, you use the perfect participle. So this is the standard use of the perfect, to indicate one thing completed before another. Look at number 13 and you'll see. Running quickly, he passed his competitors. The running and the passing took place at the same time, right? Even though passing took place in the past, the running took place at the same time. And therefore you simply use the present participle. Present participle means same time as the main verb. But now the second example, having run home, he was exhausted. We now want to indicate that the running took place and was finished, and then the exhaustion set in. So there's a sequence. And that's why we use, the perfect in English to indicate a sequence. And therefore you use the perfect participle in a perfectly standard way. You say, having run home, he was exhausted. you see. If you were to say running home he was exhausted, what would you be implying?
He was tired as he was running.
As he was running, he was tired. But in this usage, you're saying he finished running and then became tired. Now, you're lucky, I guess, in English that that's all the participles there are. Other languages have many more participles. In Greek, there's a future participle. And you can say, for instance, being about to run home, he is frightened. And then you have a special ending to indicate the state of a participle looking to the future. But that's very rare and awkward in English. Now, the main thing we want to grasp tonight, and that will complete the theory that we're going to cover tonight, is to distinguish a participle from a gerund. So let's turn to gerund. A gerund is a verbal noun. As against being an adjective. So it shares the nature of a noun and a verb. It's a cross between a noun and a verb. So it has many qualities coming from its noun element and many qualities coming from its verb element. Like a noun, it can be the subject or object of a sentence. Walking is good exercise. What's the subject? Walking. That's a gerund. I like walking. What's the object? Walking. That's a gerund. By walking every day, you grow leg muscles. What is the status of walking there? The object of preposition by. In other words, as a noun, it has all the functions of a noun. Subject, object, object of a preposition. And of course, a participle can't do anything. A participle is an adjective. It can't be the object of a preposition, the subject of a sentence, the object of a sentence. Now, it may or may not baffle you to realize that a gerund can be modified by either an adjective or an adverb, depending upon whether you're thinking of it as a noun or a verb, and which of those elements is uppermost in your mind. For instance, walking is good for you. Good is an adjective modifying walking, right? You're thinking of the state of walking is good. But how about if I say walking quickly is bad for you? Quickly is an adverb modifying the activity of walking, but it's the same gerund. So don't be thrown off. It's a verbal noun, and therefore can be in cases modified by an adverb, even though nouns can. Like a verb, a gerund itself can take an object. Can anybody give me an example of a gerund with an object?
Hitting a ball is fun.
Hitting a ball is fun. Very good. Hitting is the subject. The object of the gerund is a ball. And that whole phrase then becomes the subject of is fun. Now we have to throw in that a gerunds, as verbals, also have tense and voice. It's the way participles have tense and voice. So I'll give you the name and you give me an example. Take the verb take. I want the present active gerund. Now it's easy. The present active always ends in ing. Taking. Taking Latin is excruciating. That's the present active. Now give me the present passive gerund. No. Took is a verb. You can't make the subject out of took. You can't say took is. If it's a gerund, it has to be capable of being the subject of a sentence. So give me the passive present gerund. Being taken. Being taken to the game is a wonderful experience. And my subject is being taken. That's a present passive gerund. Right? Now you can do the same thing in the past. Give me a past active gerund with take.
Having taken.
Having taken. Use it in a sentence.
Is having taken geometry stood him in good stead.
Okay. Is having taken geometry. It's a little awkward expression, but the fact of him having taken, you see, the having taken there is an active past gerund. Now, if you think you can think of a past passive gerund, it gets very rare, but I gave an actual example in number 14. I learned a great deal by having been taken to the cleaners at a car cleaner. Now, having been taken is the object of the preposition by, so it's a gerund. It's being taken, it's passive, and it's the perfect or the past gerund, having been taken, not by being taken. So this phenomenon, having been taken, in this usage, is a past passive gerund, believe it or not. That is not a common usage. Now, the main grammatical importance of all of this is to be able to distinguish gerund and participle, and that's the point we're going to conclude on this evening after presenting. You must know when something is a gerund and when it's a participle in order to employ them correctly. Gerund is the noun form. It's the thing that functions as subject or object. I'm just repeating it, I'm reminding you. Participle is the adjective form and can't exist without some noun or pronoun that is modified. Now, the confusion of the two is well illustrated in number 15. I took this example from Fowler. Read those three examples. This is Fowler's example. Women having the vote share power with men. Having there is which one? Participle? Well, I've written it down obviously. Which one is it? Participle. Why?
Okay.
Tells you what kind of women. Women, what kind? Who have the vote? Right? Women having the vote. And therefore, the subject of the verb is women. The verb is share. And then having the vote is simply a participial phrase modifying women. Now, what about the second? Women's having the vote reduces men's power. What is the subject of reduces? Is it women's? No, obviously. Reduces is singular, as proven by the S. So what is the subject? Having. So if that's the subject, it is a gerund. It's the noun form. What then is the status of women there? The women's. That's really an adjective. What kind of having? The having of the women. It's a noun in its adjectival or possessive form. So in the first you have a noun with an adjective. And the noun is women and the adjective is having. In the second you have a noun which is having. That's the gerund. And women's is simply an adjective. Alright. The first I say is a participle. The second is a gerund. But now look at the structure of this third, because the third is the error of confusing. That's the error that Fowler calls fused participle. Women having the vote reduces men's power. Now parse this sentence. What is the subject? Is it women? No. Can't be women because the verb is singular. Is it having? Well, presumably having would be the subject. Having reduces, but what form is women? There is no form in which you can just stick a noun next to another noun and make it an adjective. And consequently, this would be a noun pileup, but it wouldn't be functioning as an adjective. And therefore, there's no grammar to this sentence. What you have a confused idea that women is the subject, and a confused idea that having is the subject, and you haven't made up your mind. So you have fused a participial element with an actual gerund and confused yourself altogether and lost your grammar. In other words, you have a participle treated like a gerund, which isn't a gerund. And that's what he calls a fused participle. And I'll read his comment on it. In the first of these three, the subject of the sentence is women, and having is a true participle attached to women. In the second, the subject is the gerund, having, and women's is a possessive case, an adjective attached to that noun. The grammar in these two is normal. In the third, the subject is neither women, because reduces is singular, nor having, because if so, women is left in the air without grammatical construction. You see? And therefore you have no grammar of an intelligible kind in the third. And that's what he calls the fallacy of fused participle. It's actually the fallacy of not grasping clearly the distinction between gerund and participle. And therefore, to avoid that, you must decide when you write one of these sentences. Is your subject the gerund or the noun or pronoun? What is your actual subject? If the subject is the noun or pronoun, okay. Then the modifier is simply the participle. But if your subject is the gerund and there is another noun or pronoun, you must put them in the possessive case to make it clear that they're an adjective attached to your gerund. Look at number 16. Upon you leaving the room, I shall pay the rent I owe. Now, what is leaving in that sentence? What is it? Participle or a gerund?
Participle.
No,
No.
not a participle.
Problem is the
Fused.
last one.
You've got one choice left.
Fused participle.
It is a gerund. It's the object of what preposition? Upon leaving. Right? Now, what is you? That's a straight pronoun. So you leaving is just like women have it. It's a noun pileup or a substantive pileup because it's a pronoun right next to another noun. Right? So what would it have to be grammatical? Your. The general rule is if you have a modifier before a gerund, it must be in the possessive form. It can't be you leaving, it has to be your leaving. And here again you see you have that confusion. Does leave modify you or does you modify leave? And that's what you have to decide. And here the construction requires. Now you have to follow the actual sentence though. Look at the next one. We caught John running away. Now, is that sentence okay? Perfectly okay. Would you have to say, we caught John's running away? Obviously, no, we didn't catch his running away. We caught him. That's the object. And then what was he doing? Running away. So that is simply what? It's participle modifying John. So that's perfectly okay. No apostrophe S is required because it's a participle, not a gerund. You get the distinction here. Now the last one to look at. I didn't give you the right answer. You have to decide. We could not think of him or his acting the part. We could not think of him acting the part. We could not think of his acting the part. It's him if it's a participle. It's his if it's a gerund. Now, what are we thinking of? Are we thinking of him doing something, or are we thinking of the doing? Now, let me see by a show of hands. How many would say him acting? How many would say his acting? Well, the former are correct. In this sentence, we are thinking of him. That's the object. And what are we thinking of him doing? Acting a part. Now, I'll give you a sentence where you would use the his. We could not think of his acting without getting sick. Then what you're thinking of is not him, but his acting. You see? In which case, then I have to switch to the his, the possessive form, and it's the gerund. So you have to know the precise nature of your thought. Are you thinking of the substantive and then simply an adjective connected to it, or are you thinking of the process itself in the form of a gerund, in which case then the substantive has to be in the possessive to keep your grammar? I got an example or two of that on the exercises, and that's the point at which we will stop our theory for tonight. You'll be happy to know that this is, I would say, one of the most technical of the lectures. I don't think that the points per se are so difficult tonight, but the trouble is there's a lot of terminology, and you don't really have time, I must admit, in this format, to take it in and absorb it, and I hammer you with another one, and then another, and another. So, if you took notes, maybe by the time you review it, it will settle down. Also, the homework should help. There's a sheet of homework for next time. Now let's take up as much homework as we can. We have a couple left over from lecture 2, but I want to start with the ones from number 3. Now you look more or less stunned. All the verbs did not do you in. Now here we have an easier, more or less a stylistic rather than grammatical homework, basically. You have a choice of 3 errors: poor parallelism, incomplete thought, or too many words. And I want you to say which, why, and then redo it in some appropriate way. All right, let's start. This is exercises on lecture 3. Number 1, who got something wrong with that? Arlene?
I think incomplete grammatical structure and it's
Incomplete, correct. Why?
and it's wordy. It's incomplete.
Well, I don't know that it's wordy. We'll have to see. But why is it incomplete?
They always have, you could say they always have take. They always have take.
Right. If you're going to have as your auxiliary, then you must have the form of taken with it. This was when we had what we call what? 2 things running into the same word. Confluences. And in this case, the have must take taken, and the will takes take. So you'd have to say they always have taken their car to work, and they always will something like do so or whichever to finish it. But now why is this wording in about beyond that? It's not the same thought. Because theoretically you could say they've always taken their car to work, but that's it. They're never going to do it again.
No, but I thought that you could say they always take their car to work, or they always drive to work, and that always would still imply past, present, future.
Well, if you say they always drive their car to work, that is simply they do it regularly. But if you want to stress, up to now they did do it, and they're going to continue, if you had some reason to make that distinction, and not just generally they always do, per se that would not be egregiously wordy if you had a purpose. So I would, just to keep the intention here as much as possible, reword it as they always have taken their car to work and always will do so. It's a little awkward to put both of them together. They always have taken and always will take their car to work. You put so much between the verb and the object, so it's better to finish one off and then stick the other on at the end. North.
I made it, they always have taken their car to work, semicolon, they always will, period. Do you need to do so after that?
You need to do so basically because otherwise you're implying a word already uttered, which you never uttered. You never said take, only taken. And it's generally considered a poor style to imply an unuttered word in this way. But as far as putting a semicolon, that's up to you. You're giving it then two main clauses without a conjunction. That's okay, but it's not necessary. Yes.
Why is this not a case of faulty parallelism?
What is the parallelism?
The verb with the object have.
No, there's nothing that says you can't use two verbs with the same object.
But in this case, you can't have they always.
Yes, you can have two different tenses. You can do everything this does except use the one participle, the one form of the verb with two different auxiliaries. So it's not that it doesn't parallel the structure, it's that they leave out one form. All right, number 2. Yes.
Wordiness.
Right. This is very wordy.
Everyone required or form is here.
Too wordy.
You've got everyone is here.
Everyone is here is not the same. That's less wordy, but that's not the same.
We have a forum.
We have a forum. Or form. Okay, or
Forum.
Probably the simplest is simply a quorum is present. Forward. Now, all the people that are required to be here for us to be able to make up a quorum is completely useless for simply a quorum. And to say is physically present as opposed to what? Spiritually. And once you say present, what are you adding when you say I'm in attendance? So it's incredibly wordy. It takes 4 words at most. Number 3. Yes.
It's faulty parallelism
Right,
after
faulty
correlatives.
Yes, after correlatives. How would you reword it?
Well, if you want to stay with correlatives, I would say either obey logic or court disaster.
Well, you drop out the you must. Either obey logic or court disaster. In which case, you are using what mood? You're giving us 2 imperatives, right, after the correlative. That's okay. How can you keep the indicative, though, and the correlative? Either you must obey logic or you must court disaster. Or, suppose you want only you must once. How would you reword it? North.
You must either obey logic or...
Right. You must either obey logic or court, because then you've got the you must governs both, and after the correlative either or, you have just one single verb, obey and court. So it's faulty parallelism. Now number 4. On the typical psychological report. As regards to responsibility, etc., I must observe that I agree with the committee who found that it couldn't be discovered or verified. The trouble with these exercises, see, they're so obvious. You can't trick anybody. What's wrong with number 4? Trying to get somebody. Yes. Wording. Definitely wording. Now give me this one in, I got it in 8 words.
11.
You got 11. Let's hear it.
I agree with the committee that the children are not responsible.
I agree with the committee that the children are not responsible. Well, I have 2 questions on that. That's certainly much better than this. Number 1, how important is it to his thought that he agrees with the committee? Now that is usually 9 times out of 10 verbiage or some kind of crutch. In actual thought is they're not responsible. And that the committee said it and he agrees with it is a long way of saying I believe this, which is implied in the statement anyway. So unless there's some special context where it's important to say a committee said it and on top of that I agree, you would just strike that out as verbiage. But now, the children are not responsible is a little condensed. Because after all, there are many things children could be responsible for their parents, for World War III, etc. And in this case, there's a specific thing they're talking about. They're not responsible for their behavior. So I think that phrase is necessary. See, you have to cut, but not to the point where you lose the thought. So I would say the best condensation in the typical context would be something like, the children are not responsible for their behavior. And the rest of this, as regards, I must observe that I agree, and so on, couldn't be discovered or verified in any way, shape, or form. It's all just talk. Yes?
Yeah, there seemed to be, to me, conveyed in the original form of not the conclusion that children are not responsible for their behavior, but the idea that there's no way of determining whether the children are responsible for their behavior, which is, to me, is a different
thought. If this guy actually had such a thought, I would agree with you. Normally, the people who write that way do not have thoughts. And therefore, when you edit them, you strip out everything. But suppose the guy was a scientist, and he wanted to say, my thought is not that children aren't responsible, but after extensive investigation and a definite methodology, I couldn't verify their responsibility. Then you'd have to throw that in the pot as one of the essential elements. But I was here taking the calculator risk that anyone who talks like that is beyond the pale of language, let alone something. Yes?
You lost the argument from authority, though, in the way that you rephrased it.
That's true. But let's try to be as factual as we can be in our editing. You'll learn something, but the thing is, we have to decide what is central here. In the context, of course, but this is just a grammatical exercise. 5 is good enough, Bill. Go to 5.
Oh, I just had one point on 4.
Yeah, I know you did. I was trying to get on the 5. What's your point?
Also, as incomplete thought, you lose the tense. You don't know whether they are responsible or were responsible for their behavior for that. Well, there's no tense there. It says responsibility for their behavior. It doesn't do with past versus present.
Well, that's a minor point, so let's drop it beyond 5. Okay.
5 is a word.
5 is wordy. It's a special type of wordiness. You want a name for it, my own name. I call it apologetic wordiness. That is words put in to apologize for what you say. This is a central mark of a doctoral dissertation in the humanities. You must put these words throughout what you're saying to make it clear that you're not sure of what you're talking about. Which is the first one here?
In a sense.
In a sense. Now that is the most overused phrase in scholarly writing. They put it in because no one can contest what you say when you put in a sense in, because if you say, for instance, Germany, in a sense, won World War II. Say, well, what do you mean? That in a sense, in a metaphorical sense, in a loose sense, in some sense. In a sense, anything is true. And therefore, this is a terrible filler. If you say in a sense, you should pause 10 times to, is this really necessary? If you use it twice on the same page, you're already in trouble. That's typical academic muting, to dilute your content, to save yourself from your colleagues. And that's one of the things that makes it, you stick in a lot of perhapses. It may be thought that, all that sort of stuff, to kill the bluntness of the thought. What else in this sentence? If the word may be used. Well, if it can't, don't use it. So, and of course, the also is also unnecessary. We've already said and. So it should simply be, this ashtray is large and expensive.
Why not this large ashtray is expensive?
Well, now there's an issue of emphasis. This large ashtray is expensive, focuses more on the expensive. That becomes then the copula, you see, so presumably this guy, we're trying to keep the idea that both these qualities are equally important. Remember, reduction of words is not an end in itself, if there is some legitimate emphasis. All right, number 6. Now this I took from Forster instead. Because it's tricky to rewrite it. The error is not difficult. What is the error of number 6? This is a classic, perfect example of one of those 3 errors.
Faulty parallelism?
Faulty parallelism. Now what? What are the 3 things that are parallel to each other? After the such as, what is the first one? Making money. What grammatical form is that? That's one of the 3 things that people...
Participle.
No, sir. Such as what? What's the object of it? It's a gerund. Making money is one thing. That's a gerund. What is for the fun of it? Prepositional phrase. What is because they are forced to do so? Adverbial clause. So you have a gerund, a phrase, and a clause. That's obviously hopeless from the point of view of parallelism, and yet the guy is saying there are 3 reasons. Now, this is easy to spot the error, but the fun comes in trying to rewrite it. Now, can anybody rewrite it with 3 prepositional phrases? People take many risks for various reasons. Dash. Give me 3 prepositional phrases now. Yes.
For money, for fun, and out of necessity.
Okay, for money, for fun, and out of necessity. For money, for fun, and under compulsion. Something like that. All right. Can you give me 3 gerunds now? People take risks for various reasons. Dash. Well, the first one is okay. Making money.
Making money, having fun, and being under compulsion.
Making money, having fun, or being under compulsion. The being is a little okay, but it is a gerund, but it's the verb to be. So if you want a real verb, say like obeying the will of others or something of that kind. Can you give me 3 clauses? People take many risks for various reasons.
In order to make money?
Well, that's not a clause, that's just a prepositional phrase. Because they want to make money, because they want to enjoy life, because they are forced to do so. Now, the repetition of because makes it terrifically emphatic. Because. And yet, without it, you're going to have such a long series of clauses you won't remember the conjunction, which is one reason why people save it for the end and fail their parallels. Okay, now 7 is perhaps one of the best examples on here, also taken from Forster's statement of a true, error, the way people actually think in one of the worst possible ways. This is a very bad error, number 7. But this is typical of the way people actually express themselves. The thought here, by the way, in case you didn't grasp it from the examples, that after World War I, certain countries were created by the statesmen in adjudicating World War I, and Germany got one of them. And this is the way the person worded it. Germany recently acquired a country which was formed from the World War. Now,
That's totally different than that.
that was the original actual intent of the person. You get to be able to divine that from reading Enough Fun With Them. If that's what he meant.
I thought Germany annexes Austria. Would have been.
No, this is World War.
Well, I know, but
One.
Austria was created out of World War I.
Yeah.
But the time not being, being able to be determined by the structure, I assumed it to mean subsequent to that, this event took place, and the event which took place was Germany annexing Austria.
Well, I guess you could guess that.
Austria was already formed.
But here, let's take it more closer to what is allegedly said here. Now, what is wrong with this then, number 7? It's obviously very unclear. Why is it unclear? It's not wordy and it's not false parallelism, so you know by it's incomplete. But what is left out? A whole thought in this case, not just a grammatical particle or word, but an entire essential concept. And what one slender word has to bear the brunt for that whole thought? What one single preposition? From. Which was formed, and all the person has in his mind is there's a country that was formed and has something to do with the World War. And the connection is just a preposition thrown in which does not in fact govern the war at all. I came from the store. Okay, but this wasn't formed from the war. So that's like a preposition used as an empty connector. He doesn't know how to get from form to war. So he just leaves a gap in his thought and throws a preposition into the breach. That is very, very poor thinking, because the essence of the thought is omitted. Now, what would, if you had to put it in actual words, his thought, you'd have to say something like, Germany recently acquired a country which was formed by treaties signed after the World War. Then it literally was formed by those treaties, and they came after or as a result of the World War. But all that thought, you see, which is what he's groping for, is omitted. If you get the nature of this error, we don't have to argue about the exact wording because the thought is unclear. The crucial thing is, why is the thought unclear? Because some essential concept or concept is omitted, and he jumps in thought from one term, form, to another, war, without grasping the actual connection between them, and just throws an empty preposition. Yes?
Post hoc fallacy.
Well, you can't dignify this by giving it a logical fallacy, because it's not yet a thought. There is no such grammar as formed from a war. In a certain context, something can be formed from silver, but it can't be formed from war. So it is not a grammatical expression. Yes.
And then as a result of the war would still be incomplete, or have to be as a result
No,
of
which
treaty?
was formed as a result of the war, but then formed is not too good. You'd say created, which was created as a result of the war, or created after the war. All right, number 8. The new president is very conservative and hated by liberals. Yes? Well, you say parallelism. Why?
Because you've got two thoughts, two completely different thoughts in the same sentence, but they don't have a connection.
Well, they have the connective and. Why can't I say the new president is fat and ugly? Two adjectives connected by and. So here I'm saying conservative and hated.
Because you're describing a characteristic of the president, and then you're giving a different thought about how people or someone or something feels
Well,
about him.
you're on the track, but it's not simply that there are two adjectives or two modifiers. There's something about the grammatical form which is different between conservative and hated. That requires a different wording. So it is a failure of something, but it's not a parallelism. What is the problem here? Yes.
One phrase should be made relative to the other, like with a word like consequently.
Oh, not necessarily. You can have two modifiers without saying one as a result of the other. There's no law about that.
Isn't that the...
No, let's analyze this as follows. Take the first one. The new president is very conservative. What is the verb? Is. So the subject is president. The modifier is conservative, leaving aside new and very. And the verb is. It's just a form of the verb to be uniting two, a noun and an adjective, right? And the is the complete verb, right? Is, that's the form of the verb to be, called the copula. It simply links the noun and the adjective. But now look at it. The new president, hated by liberals. Now what is he trying to say here? What is the verb? Is hated. So the verb here is hated. It is the verb in the passive form. If you're going to do that, you have to give the full verb. You can't take a word like is, which is a complete verb in one clause, and part of a verb in the next clause. Each clause has to get its verb. And if the full verb is hated, you have to repeat the is. The new president is conservative and is hated by liberals. See? The passive form of the verb requires the is to be repeated because that is before hated is not the same is. One is a simple copy. When you get to hated, you have to starting over with your own verb. So this would technically be called grammatically incomplete. The auxiliary is omitted in the passive form of the verb. Yes.
How shaky is the justification that hated by liberals is a participial phrase, functioning as the predicate adjective of his? Pretty shaky.
It's pretty shaky because in this connection, you're focusing on the liberals doing the hating.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more plausible if you said the new president is conservative and hated, and widely hated, you see. But when you bring in by, you're so much making it the passive voice that you've got to put the particle in the name. Number 9.
Also wordy then?
No, it's not wordy enough. Drop the necessary is.
I turned it around and said liberals hate the new conservative president.
Well, that's okay. You say liberals hate the new
voice.
conservative president, but you're doing what Kathy did. That is, you're changing his emphasis. You're saying that it's more important that they hate, you see, and that the conservative is a lesser thing.
Well, you can,
Would that
that
also
can be kept though. The new very conservative president is hated by liberals.
Doesn't make any difference. You're still making one the passive voice and other an adjective coming before the noun, which is not as much stress as the new president is conservative.
Okay.
Now, the emphasis here is not too important, and the passive voice is not too good anyway. But I just put this in to indicate that the same word cannot do two grammatically different jobs. Number 9. The veal was so good, I couldn't have found a better restaurant if I had tried to look before. Well, number 1 error is one word in the first clause. No, what is it? Veal is okay and good is okay. So is a word which requires a completion. So good that I fainted with delight. But so by itself is not simply an intensive. It's not very good. It requires a completion. So that's a separate error. But the real error is in what word in the second clause? Before. What's wrong with before?
Before what?
Before what? So what error is this then? Incomplete thought. This is another typical way that people express themselves. They have an idea. If before dinner I had gone to look for a restaurant, I never would have found one. And they get to the before and it just trails away, and the listener doesn't know before what. Yes.
Is that to look before really necessary at all?
No.
How would you reword it without?
Well, after correcting the veal was so good, to say the veal was good or the veal was excellent, you would say, I couldn't have found a better restaurant if I had tried.
If I had tried. Yes, that would be definitely better. Okay, number 10. Well, we don't have to worry about the word use in that. Number 10. Yes.
It's worded.
Well, I have another error primarily in mind here. You could reduce it to our political party is, but I have another. There's a definite, specific grammatical error.
2 words versus action.
That's correct. This is a failure of parallelism because not but are correlatives. And if you have the prepositional phrase after one, you can't just have a noun after the other. So it would have to be not 2 words, but 2 actions. Right. Number 11. Now this is a common error, number 11. I have an interest and feeling for sculpture. Yes.
Correlative?
No correlatives in this sentence. There's only one conjunction, so how could there be 2 correlative? Correlative is conjunctions used in a pair. What word does double duty here? For, right? But interest doesn't go with for. You can't say I have an interest for sculpture, right? So you're trying to imply I have an interest and feeling for sculpture. Interest doesn't go with for. What does interest require? In. So if you want it, this is a confluence, but it doesn't run in. What do you have to put in after interest? In. So you'd have to say, I have an interest in and feeling for. But that's very awkward. So how would you say it?
I have an affinity for sculpture.
But you change it to a single word, I have an affinity. But suppose you wanted to keep both words. I have an interest in sculpture and a feeling for it. Now, number 12. This is, well, it's obvious what's wrong with this, right? What is wrong with number 12? In a word. Wordy. Very, very wordy. Now, we could go over this in great length. But rather than do it, let me just tell you what I did. I went over it and I said to myself, what is the main thought of this sentence? What is the main idea? I used to meter, but I'm metered now and things aren't the same, right? All the rest is where we met, when we met, for adverbs. But the main idea is it's not the same. So I got the idea. When I met her, it wasn't the same. Now, I don't want to go into this incredible. My whole purpose here now is the technique of reduction, so I don't want to go into a long time after we've grown up. That simply is a when, right? It's a time. So let's try starting with when, right? Because that's all that's telling me is a time consideration. How about then we try when my sister and I met again? But that's a little too vague because this one tells us we grew up. Now, can I get that in briefly? When we met again as adults. How about that? Now, true, I leave out the idea that it was a long time. But remember, when you condense, something usually has to go. And unless that's essential, I'm happy to drop it. So I put it, when my sister and I met again as adults, it was different. Why say not the same? Get it down to different. So, now all I have to do is give the reason. Now, notice I left it was not the same as it had been when we used to meet in the little town which was near LA where we had grown up. Well, I don't care. If I've decided that the main thought is it wasn't the same, it's irrelevant to that thought that we used to grow up, that we grew up in a town near LA, etc. That's all just verbiage, because it isn't essential to what the sentence hinges on. So I just dropped it. When we met again as adults, it was different. Now, what's the reason? Because. Well, we can kill the because by what punctuational device, which stands for because, just as an extra, a colon. So now we've got to give the reason. She had a baby with her who had just been born. Well, that's ridiculous. A whole clause who had just been born, by reduction or predication, we can kill the whole clause in one adjective, namely
newborn.
Newborn or even new. She had a new baby. Now, and I was years older. Well, obviously, if we met when we grew up, you were years older, so that's up. And I felt much more mature, much is an intensive, unnecessary, and I felt more mature. So the actual essential content reduces to, when my sister and I met again as adults, it was different. She had a new baby and I was more mature. And that's all that verbiage stripped of the inessentials and then compressed instead of not the same, different, instead of because of colon, getting rid of one word at a time. Now I grant you that you could, by further judicious working, probably get it down even more terse, but the thought doesn't warrant it. As an exercise, that's sufficient. Let's look at 13 quickly. There are several people not interviewed yet, and whom I shall see now. And that is what error. There are two things I tell you about people. They're not interviewed yet. That's one. And what form is that? What form is interviewed? It's a participle, a past participle. And what is whom I shall see now? That's a clause. So I have what fallacy? Failure of parallelism. How would I correct it? Either put two clauses, for instance. There are several people whom I have not interviewed and whom I shall see now, or give up the parallelism, subordinate one. Say, there are several people not interviewed yet whom I shall now see. That's okay. But the and whom, it's called the fallacy of the and whom or the and which, when you put the second one without the first. And that's a failure of parallel. Yes?
I shall now see the people who have been interviewed.
Yes, but you're changing simply the emphasis there. You're making the main clause, I shall now see, instead of there are people, you see. That's okay, but I was just wanting to give you an example of keeping the same emphasis with a different, without the failure of parallel. Yes?
Is there a rule about inserting an adverb in the verb construction if it's between an auxiliary and its main?
You mean like the not?
Like the now. Whom I shall now see.
That's okay. You can say whom I shall now see. You can't make a flat rule that you can't put an adverb between the auxiliary and the participle or the verb form. You can if the emphasis and so on makes it appropriate. We're going to discuss what's called split constructions next time. When can you introduce something in the middle of a construction, like a verb or an infinitive, etc., next time. Now, before we conclude, I want to do the two examples that we have left over from exercise 2. So look to that part, exercise 2, your homework. Are you going to have to turn that over?
Take more than 5-6 minutes?
I don't think so. All right, number 12. We had decided that this was wordy. Now, I'd like to give you a chance to volunteer if we had time. Does anybody, who got it down to something brief without basically butchering this thought, if there is a thought here? Who did? You did, Phil? All right, let's hear it.
I got 20 words. He liked the books.
Now slow, because we have to memorize this.
Okay.
He
liked the books in the bookcase bought at the Christmas Fair auction because it held volumes famous in his avocation.
Oh, that's very reasonable. Very good. He liked the books in the bookcase bought at the Christmas Fair auction. I like at the Christmas Fair auction. I had, so far, he liked the books in the bookcase bought during the Christmas Fair. I just dropped auction because I didn't know what to do with it. Now, Christmas Fair auction, however, is 3 of them. Christmas Fair auction. So, that may be why I shied away from it, but it doesn't seem too bad in this context. And what you did there, you see, is which were in the bookcase. You dropped the subject and verb and just took the prepositional phrase. That's reduction of predication. The bookcase which he had bought. He used just the participle, bought, the past participle, dropped the whole clause. At the auction, you reduced from a phrase to a word, right? And Christmas and Fair, instead of which was held at, etc. So basically, you have reduced that very nicely. Now you went on to because it held, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's okay. I was doing this from the aspect of less to take in, less strain. So I put a period. He liked them, period. And then I went on some were. Instead of it held, just some of the books were, you see. Now, famous, and then how did you do this? In his?
Because it held volumes famous in his avocation.
Well, you see, I wouldn't need because it held if I just said some were.
Okay.
Famous, and you said in his avocation.
Yeah.
That's okay. You dropped the idea that he enjoyed it, which is insignificant. I said among his fellow hobbyists. But it's the same idea. Now, you get it down to 18, 19 words by simply, you see, the minor thing here is dispensing with unimportant thoughts, but like which you enjoy. But the major thing is getting rid of whole clauses and substituting phrases or single words. And if you get that technique, you will find that you are easily able to reduce your verbiage and get the thoughts much more easy to take in. Now I want to look in conclusion at this last thing on the page. Who took what as, this is the one, combine the following into one unified sentence with appropriate subordination. Who took what as the main clause? Jim.
Grammar is worth studying.
Grammar is worth studying. I took that too as the main clause because it fits so easily into one then sentence. All right, the rest are all subordinates. Now, what is the logic? What is, first of all, your sentence?
Although the homework in this course takes too much time and the teacher goes too fast.
All right, stop there. You got two all those, which is very good reasoning, because your thought, that's exactly what I did, because your thought is, grammar is worth studying, but if you look at this information, some of it would seem to mitigate against that. If the guy goes too fast and the homework is too long, why study? So that's what's called a concessive clause. You're saying, I grant you this is a negative, but I'm still going on to make my main point, and although is the word for that. So you took two of these clauses and subordinated them via making them concessions. Although this and this, nevertheless, you see. Okay. Grammar is worth studying. And now where do you go?
As English is a difficult language, with subordination especially difficult.
As or because, so you're giving us the reason now, right, for the main clause. Fine. And the only unnecessary redundancy there is you repeated subordination twice. I mean, you repeated difficult twice. As English, how could you do it without repeating difficult twice? As English, and particularly subordination is difficult, you see. Or the rules of subordination is difficult, you see. But other than that, that's fine. You took, you see, instead of just giving us five, you said one is important, two give the reason, two give us a negative, a concession aside from the reason. And you put it into one unified thought. Now, who took a different main clause? You took that it goes too fast?
No, subordination in English.
I'd like to hear how you make that the main clause. Okay.
Subordination in English is especially difficult, comma, English being a difficult language, semicolon. But even though the homework in this course takes too much time and the teacher goes too fast, comma, grammar is underlined worth studying.
You didn't really do what you said, because grammar is worth studying is still a main clause in your structure.
Well,
you simply gave us a compound sentence with two main clauses, which is okay, but not nearly as unified a sentence. So I really wanted a sentence with one main clause and all the rest subordinated. I mean, if I wanted to, I could make five main clauses and simply say English is a difficult language and the homework takes too much time and grammar is worth studying. So it's a slight failure to fulfill the assignment to give me a semicolon. I wanted a one shot with one main clause. Who took something different as a main clause with only one main clause and all the rest subordinate? It would be hard to do. Did you do? What was yours?
The main clause was the teacher goes too fast.
Teacher goes too fast is the main clause.
And the homework takes too much time.
Well, you have both the negatives as the main clause. All right, let's hear the rest.
Okay. Although grammar is worth studying, the teacher in this course goes too fast and the homework takes too much time, comma, particularly when covering subordination, which is especially difficult in English, comma, a difficult language in the first place.
Well, you did get all the elements in, but you chose what would normally be the concession as your focus. You see. So you've got a unified sentence, but what comes across from yours is, well, maybe grammar is worth studying and so on, but the main thing is, this is too fast and it's too much work.
Well, I did this right after last week's class.
I see. So, you see, you did have a unified sentence, but with a completely different intention. All right, now you could do others. I think the most natural in this case would be the grammars we'll study. All right, we finished 2 and 3 completely, and next time we'll take up the homework for 4, and finish infinitives, and then do pronouns. See you next time.